Hello, Matt Hodson here for Sonicstate, and today I'm not looking at one Eurorack module, I'm actually looking at two, both of them by the company Knobula. We've got the Polycinematic and the Kickain, both of them 12 HP, and both of them dressed in these rather kind of snazzy colours here. The Polycinematic is essentially a 56 oscillator synthesizer with 8 voice polyphony. You've got CV control over things like pitch, gate, filter. You've got MIDI straight on the front there and MIDI CC control. It does interesting things with chord memory and micro tuning. It's got a built-in reverb, a filter, and yeah, it just gives you this kind of thing. Pretty good stuff, eh? Really like the sound of the reverb on this, really like the sound of the filter as well. Just looking at the front panel, let's have a look what we've got. Well, the blue section at the top gives you your envelope. So you've got your attack, you've got this center dial here, which kind of goes from the K, so you can have essentially an AD envelope kind of thing going on, and then it becomes sustain, and then as you turn it round and round more, the sustain kind of drops in value. You've then got a dedicated release here as well. The pink section is essentially the filter section. You've got a filter frequency dial here. You've got 3 different types of filters to choose from, which is low pass, notch, and high pass. You've got resonance control for it. You've got envelope depth, and you've actually got key follow for that as well. You've got a little blue button here, which allows you to trigger the voice as well, which is pretty handy. The grey section is essentially the oscillator section. You've got a detune dial here, which allows you to kind of detune the oscillators in relative kind of pitch intervals, ranging from unison, fifths, and sub-octaves as well, which is quite kind of useful. You've got a fine tune here and a pitch dial. You've then got 3 different waveforms to choose from. The first one being a 7 oscillator sawtooth, the third one being a 3 oscillator square pulse voice, and then you've got a 3 oscillator organ drawbar on the last one there. And then for each one of these waveform selections, you've got a different mode for each. So you get kind of 3 different variations of each one of those, which is really, really cool. You've then got a reverb here, stereo out, you've got your MIDI in on the front, trigger input, chord selection, volt per octave, and you've also got your filter frequency CV control there, which I've actually got hooked up to the mod of the keyboard I'm using here. So you're hearing the notch there, hearing the high pass there. So let's just run through these controls in a little bit more depth. I'll just take off the reverb for now, and I'll just leave it on the first waveform, take off the envelope depth, and we've got so our attack, as you'd imagine, goes from very instant playability to really nice fade in. And I believe with each voice you play, the envelope re-triggers for that voice. Well, it does, it seems to anyway for my ears. Like I mentioned, you've got your sustain in the middle. Take off the release so you can hear what's going on there. So it's essentially an AD envelope now. As you bring it round, if I hold down my chord, you then get sustain there, and the sustain drops as you move it round. Add on your release, and you're good to go. So really easy to use envelope there. Your filter, let's just listen to that little bit of resonance. You can get plenty out of that resonance. Let's listen to the notch. Just a bit more sustain there. That notch is kind of almost a bit like a phaser. I can imagine if we was to modulate the filter frequency here via CV, I don't know, with an LFO or something like that, you could get some pretty mad psychedelic sounds going on there. Actually more prominent with less resonance as well. And then you've got your high pass, which almost completely disappears. Let's check out the waveforms then. So as I mentioned in the first wave selection here, we've got this kind of sawtooth voice, which is what we're listening to. The second variation of that, it's got a bit more brightness to it. And the third variation, again, even more brighter to my ears. You get a lot of different sounds out of this. The second voice is the three oscillator square kind of pulse. You can instantly hear that. And the third variation, second variation of that. Third variation. A little bit sharper sounding. And then the third one, which is this kind of chord organy sort of drawbar sound. A little bit more quieter. I guess it's maybe just a little bit more quieter. It's maybe not as rich in harmonic content as, say, the sawtooth voice or something like that, which you'd expect. Let's just check out the reverb, just putting it back to the sawtooth sound. Got our dry wet here. I'll just go back to the low pass as well. Now you can actually change the reverb length time using the same dial, holding down shift. Now this shift button in the middle, actually, if you hold it down, you can get to a few other parameters that aren't instantly accessible on the front. So for example, you can change which MIDI channel this receives on. It'll go 1/16 obviously, or Omni. You can also then change the pitch tune to fine tune, and then with the reverb you can actually change the size of the reverb. So if we turn that all the way around to the right, we've just essentially increased the reverb size there to its maximum. And to my ears, I just love the sound of this reverb. It makes the voice even wider. Really, really nice sounding. And even on its maximum setting there, we're not kind of taking the reverb into overdrive. It's not distorting. It's still going. Now, if we want to decrease the size of that, of course, we just hold down shift. Let's just roll it back a little bit to maybe quarter of the size. And then this turns back into a dry wet knob. Now we're not holding down shift. So let's take that to about halfway. Great sounding, 12 HP, all of that polyphony, very easy to use envelope, great sounding filter, great sounding reverb. There's not much I don't like about this really. It's very difficult to get so much polyphony inside of Eurorack without buying, you know, all those different oscillators, envelopes, amplifiers. It would really fill up your case. And here we've got such a small footprint of 12 HP. I'm really impressed with the sounds of this. Let's now just have a little play with the frequency here, and instead of changing the filter frequency with my mod wheel here, I'll just take that out and we shall drive it from the Quadra. So we'll give it a bit more of an envelope shape using that. And let's just turn the rest of this down so we just hear. So it's being controlled by the Quadra. I'm just sending a trigger from the Nerd sequencer to open and close that. And it sounds to me like the reverb is after the filter frequency because it's not closing off that reverb. We're getting that overhang. There, it's completely dry. So that can be quite useful. You know, not all of you are going to want that. Some of you probably want the reverb to be gone when you're gating it, or you're sending it through a VCA or a filter or something like that. That's fine. I mean, just turn the reverb off there and use an external reverb, I suppose. At the minute, I don't think there's any way of you kind of configuring internally where the reverb sits, if it's before or after the filter. So I think it's very much fixed. But I actually like the fact that the reverb's after the filter, especially when you're running it through an envelope, or if you're changing the filter frequency. It just gives you that extra little bit of playability, I guess. We add a little bit of the envelope depth as well. We can add that extra kind of movement to it. And of course we've got the key track, so if I was playing more up and down the keys here, or my sequence was, it's going to get brighter. Lovely stuff. Okay, let's just have a very quick look at the detuning. So let's open up the filter, take off the reverb, and we get that on the detuning. And it takes you around to fifths, and then around to octaves. We can play that with the octaves, detuned. Fifths doesn't quite work with that chord that I'm playing, but we can just have a little bit of detune like that to excite it a little bit. Let's make that reverb a little bit smaller. There we go, a bit more of a kind of roomy sounding reverb now. Now, if you're like me and you're not a very good keys player, one of the cool things in the polycinematic is that you can put it into a separate mode, which allows you to store chords straight into the polycinematic and play them back from single keys. And to access that mode, you just hold down Shift, hold down trigger for a couple of seconds. It'll go into that mode, and you can then essentially sequence all of this using the chord select from the front just by sending it some voltage. And that way you get around not having to learn the keyboard, just like me. And next up, we've got the Kickain, which, as you probably guessed, is a kick drum module, generating kind of kick drums based on the kind of 909 kind of inspired sounds, I guess. But it also has another function, which is to offer you sidechain compression. It's got a stereo in and a stereo out, which allows you to drive the mix of your whole patch through this and give you not only a kick drum, but also that sidechain compression. Just like on the polycinematic, we've got a trigger button in the middle, which is quite useful for just demoing the sound that we've got here. I'll run through a few of the front panels, and then we'll have a bit more of a listen to what it offers. We've got a drive here, gives it a little bit of kind of distortion. It basically takes it from a sine wave to triangle to square and beyond. It can get pretty gnarly. That we've got a tune for the drum oscillator, and then down here we've got the overall kind of level of it. We've got a click, which allows us to add that kind of click to the front end of the kick drum, which is essential. Obviously, if you want that sound, you want it to poke through in the mix, that's really useful. We've then got punch, which kind of adds this kind of additional short pitch bend envelope, adds a little bit more energy to the sound. And by using the bend here, it allows us to change the amount of pitch bend from the main decay envelope. We've then got the actual decay here, which is just this large dial in the middle here. We've then got the attack over here. And now this attack allows us to reduce the kind of sharp attack transient of the kick drum. So you can actually get this kind of softer kick drum instead of you kind of smash in front end aggressive kick drum. You can actually just shave off a little bit of the front end of that. It's quite interesting. You get so much out of this module. And then you've got the sidechain depth here. The more you turn that up, the more sidechain effect it has on the signal passing through the module. We've then actually got a little three-way switch up here again, and that controls how the input signal is modified by the sidechain. In a normal mode, you get this kind of traditional sidechain behavior. In the middle mode, you only get frequencies close to the pitch of the kick drum that are reduced in signal. And then in the next mode, you get that, but it's kind of more accurately targeted to any frequency removal, leaving most of the mid and high frequencies intact. So with this nifty little switch here, you can actually modify how the sidechain affects the mix that's running through this module. So if you leave it in its default position, it's just going to act just like any other sidechain compression, and it's going to duck all the frequencies that are coming through it. And as you switch it up, essentially what it does is it will only work on the low end and remove any kind of bass frequencies and leaving the kind of mids and highs alone. And that way you can kind of just get the ducking going on from any bass content and leave all your kind of, you know, all the nice top end stuff, kind of just leave that alone, doing its own thing without all of that ducking going on. It's really, really interesting implementation on this module. You've also got a reverb on this, would you believe it or not? It's not common to put reverb on your kick drum. I do. If you listen to any of my tracks, you probably heard reverbs all over the place. I'm a big fan of putting reverbs on kick drums and then distorting them and that kind of thing. Now this reverb adds kind of resonance and room reflections, and this is kind of like a dry wet knob in there. And then you've got this kind of bass cut as well. down here, which allows you to kind of control what the lowest frequency of the kick drum that this is generating is. So all the way down, it basically will generate frequencies 20 hertz and below, and then as you go up, it cuts stuff off around, I think, 40 hertz and then up to 60 hertz. So it really allows you to kind of clean up the kind of low end of your kick drum, and essentially help as a really handy EQ. If you're just finding things are just too muddy, you've got the combination of taking some of the low end out of your kick and also just affecting the sidechain of the low frequencies that are running through this module as well. So you can kind of do some really nice kind of interesting filter EQing, if you like, straight into this module. Okay, so let's have a listen. Just got a very simple sequence playing from the steppy. I'm sending a trigger signal into the trigger input of the module. We're not listening to any sidechaining going on. We've got nothing going into the module. We're just listening to the output. So we're just listening to the kick drum generation. So there's our level. And as you can see, you get the handy little light flashing there whenever you get a trigger. So let's have a little bit of a play with the distortion. So it can get pretty nasty. Let's add a bit more decay. So you can get that kind of thing going on. You can actually change the decay time as well over CV control there. So you can have some of your kicks longer than others, for example. As I mentioned, there's a click here. Without it, just bring it in. Almost adds a kind of hi-hat white noise to it. If you certainly go over 12 o'clock with this, you know, if that's what you want, then great. But for me, it sort of sits nicely around there. The punch, without the punch, with it. There we go. You can change the overall tuning, which can be changed as well using the pitch CV input there. So you can use that essentially to tune it to the key of your song. The reverb. Kind of gives it a bit of a kind of techno kind of doom sort of flavor to it, if you like. Quite like that. And we've got the bass cut. Not sure you'll hear this at home. I can certainly hear it here on headphones. It's certainly a lot cleaner on that third switch there, taking 60 hertz and below out. So okay, let's have a listen to it with the polycinematic, and I've got another oscillator lined up here playing a kind of very simple bass line. Let's just get this going. So again, no sidechain going on here. Just got the polycinematic coming in on this mixer here. I've then got the kick drum over here. I'll bring in my bass line. Now the Kickain's doing a great job. I think it sounds awesome as a kick drum. I think I'd be very happy with this, doing a lot of the kick production, whether I'm going out playing live or even when I'm working in a studio. It punches through the mix, does a really good job on its own. You can tune it to the key of your song, which is really, really useful. You can add that front end to it, or you can take away the decay time or add it on. You've kind of got the EQ section on it. But I think where it really comes into its own is if we was to take this whole mix and run it through the Kickain, we can then access the sidechain functionality and actually get it working on our whole track. Because at the minute, even though it's not a bad mix, the balances are there, right? Well, I think it'd be interesting if we run everything through the Kickain and see what difference it makes by adding the sidechain to it, to just see if it can help clean up that mix a little bit more for us. So what I'll do, I'll just quickly repatch the system, run everything through the Kickain, and then we'll see what difference it makes. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the output of this mixer, which has got both the VCO6 and the poly cinematic, and I'm going to run that into the Kickain. So now we've got everything running into the Kickain, and then it's all coming out onto this mixer here. So I'll leave the sidechain off at the moment. So we're hearing everything running through that Kickain. The reason I've run the VCO6 and the poly cinematic into a mixer first, it just gives me obviously the ability to change the levels between the two of them before it runs into the Kickain. So I'm essentially mixing them before it goes into the Kickain. Just gives me a bit more control. So let's add a bit of reverb on, and now let's add that sidechain and see what happens. And you can really hear it starting to pump now. And this is affecting all frequencies because the toggle switch is at the very left. Let's make it quite extreme. And you can really hear it ducking that reverb. But if we were to take the switch over to the far right, you can hear now that the reverb is actually being left alone because it's in the high frequency content. Everything that's in the low end, i.e. the VCO6, that's playing the kind of bass riff, that's the only thing really that's getting ducked here. Really, really useful feature, that. Really useful. Now this is extreme. Let me just roll it back a little bit. If you put it in the middle, you're going to get a little bit of that top end ducking, which might be useful for you. And actually, if we take the kick drum out of the mix, we would then also be able to hear the sidechaining that's going on within here without actually hearing the kick as well. But I'm liking what's going on here. I think this is really, really cool. Try some different waveforms here. And there we go. That's the Kickain and the Poly Cinematic by Knobula. Two really, really good modules. Getting a lot out of it in such a small HP. I really like these. I have to say, I've really enjoyed jamming with these. I think both of these would probably end up within my live rig. They don't take up much room, as I mentioned. You can get so many different sounds out of them. The fact that you've got MIDI and MIDI CC, which we didn't really get into on this, is absolutely brilliant. The fact that you've got your side chaining going on the Kickain, we just heard how much difference it actually makes. I think this is definitely a winner. In fact, one last thing that I will show you while we're here is that if we was to actually patch another patch cable into the accent, what we can do here is that whenever something occurs on the accent, you kind of get this extra pulse going on. Let me just turn down the synth and the VCO6, and just so we can hear. You hear that? So when these two triggers go, you get this extra well without it. With it. Let's put it on the first one as well. I quite like using it when the kick drum doesn't occur, and it just kind of picks up the tail of the kick drum and opens it up again. Really like that. Really cool feature. Now, if I wanted to go really extreme with this, let's open up the envelope on the polycinematic, and let's really increase the sidechain and make it extreme. And it literally does just push all those frequencies down. Middle switch. It's leaving that mid-range alone. It's just the low end of the polycinematic now. And the very top end there, it's not really doing much. But then you could drop it in. If that's your kind of thing. Listen to that reverb. Now, actually, if we take the module out of the rack, there are some dip switches on the back of the module. These dip switches are actually really useful because it actually allows you to change the functionality as to how this thing works right away. So in its default state, you've got your stereo in and your stereo out. Well, if you change one of the dip switches on the back, it allows you to essentially have a mono mode, which gives you a send and return. And that gives you then a kick drum coming out of its own output. And you can see the return and the send are actually labeled on there as well. If you change the other dip switch, number 2, it actually allows level control over the kick drum instead of pitch CV. So that means that if you send a CV voltage into there, it will actually allow you to change the level of the kick drum, which I think is really cool, because I think one of the things I'd love to have seen on this module is a mute switch instead of volume for the kick drum, or even a push switch to kind of turn it on and off. Because, you know, for people like me, when I'm playing live, I take the kick drum out and I want the kick drum to come back in. It's usually it needs to be defined. It needs to come back in at the right level. I can't be kind of trying to find the right level. But I suppose by changing the dip switch on the back, it would allow you to send voltage into this and allow you to achieve the same effect effectively. But I would love to have seen a mute switch on there, but that's just for me. There are a couple more dip switches on here, but they're not actually being used as of yet. In the manual, it says that they're reserved for future updates. So let's see what this brings. I just want to say thanks for joining us. I hope you found this useful. I should say that both of these modules retail in the UK for around £320. I think that's a really fair price point given the amount of functionality that you get out of both of these. Obviously, Knobula have really thought about what they are putting into their modules here. My understanding is this is their only 2 modules, it's their first 2 modules, and I think these are great entry into the Euro rack market. I'll certainly be looking to use these within my module setup in the future, and I think I'll just play you out on the last little jam. Thanks for listening to me today. Do leave any comments or any questions down below, and I'll try and pick them up for you. Thanks everyone, and take care.